The silent weight of a name. The glass facade of Grayson National Bank reflected the morning sun like polished armor, tall and impenetrable. To the pedestrians passing by on Monroe Street, it was just another financial institution. Cold marble, walls, revolving doors, men in tailored suits rushing in and out with leather briefcases. But to Daniel Carter, it was supposed to be the stage where history would turn. Daniel adjusted his tie in the reflection of the door, his chest tight with both excitement and pressure. Just 36 years old, he had risen from an unknown startup, founder to the CEO of Carter Global Industries, a company that had transformed supply chains and technology solutions across continents. Investors whispered his name in boardrooms. Journalists called him a prodigy. But for Daniel, none of that mattered today. Today it wasn't about the money. Today was about his father. Standing beside him was Samuel Carter, a man whose back was slightly bent from decades of labor, whose eyes had seen wars, lost jobs, and late nights spent ensuring his children had food on the table. His gray hair was cropped close, his Sunday suit pressed to perfection. He clutched a worn leather wallet, one he had carried since 1972, inside of which lay the ID that bore his name. Daniel glanced at his father and smiled. "You ready for this, Dad?" Samuel gave a modest chuckle. "Son, I've been ready. My whole life. Just never thought I'd see it like this." Today they weren't just here for signatures. Today was the closing of a $5 billion international deal, one that would secure Carter Global Industries as a titan in the logistics and energy sector. And Daniel had insisted that his father come with him, because this wasn't just his victory. It was their victory. A father's shadow. As they walked through the revolving doors, Daniel's mind drifted back to the nights of his childhood. His father coming home from the steel plant with grease-stained hands, his work boots heavy with exhaustion, yet still finding the strength to sit at the dinner table and ask his son about school. Samuel never made millions. He never even made thousands beyond what the bills demanded. But he made sacrifices, the kind invisible to the world, but unforgettable to the child who benefited from them. It was Samuel who taught Daniel how to ride a bike, how to tie a tie, and, more importantly, how to stand tall when others tried, to make him feel small. And now, walking side by side into the largest bank in the city, Samuel Carter finally got to witness his son's dream standing on solid ground. The reception desk. The marble lobby stretched upward like a cathedral, sunlight pouring through glass ceilings. A grand chandelier sparkled overhead, casting diamond-like light across the polished floor. Behind the reception desk sat a young man in a navy suit typing away at a computer. His eyes flickered up as Daniel and Samuel approached. "Good morning," Daniel said politely. "We're here for the final signing meeting with Mr. Grayson, Carter Global Industries." The receptionist nodded, scanning his list. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Conference room 17B. Take the elevators to the 20th floor. Security will just need to verify your IDs." "Of course," Daniel replied. He turned to his father. "See? Smooth sailing." Samuel smiled. "Don't jinx it, son." They approached the security checkpoint, where a tall, thin man with a badge motioned for their IDs. Daniel handed his over first. Sleek, professional, immediately scanned and verified. The guard returned it with a curt nod. Then Samuel reached into his wallet. His hand, slightly shaky with age, pulled out the leather sleeve. He offered his driver's license, a little worn but perfectly valid. The guard examined it briefly before handing it, not back to Samuel, but over to another man. The bank manager, he appeared almost on cue, like an actor stepping onto stage. Mr. Philip Anderson, the bank's regional manager, crisp suit, polished shoes, a smirk that carried both condescension and false politeness. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing Daniel with a shallow smile. "Welcome. I understand today is significant." Daniel extended his hand. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. We're very excited to finalize things." Anderson shook it briefly before glancing at Samuel, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as though puzzled by his presence. "And who might this be?" he asked, though the question was rhetorical. Samuel's ID was still in his hand. "This," Daniel said proudly, "is my father. The man who raised me." I wanted him to be here for this moment. Anderson's lips curled, though not into a smile, more like a sneer trying to disguise itself as indifference. He glanced down at the ID, then back at Samuel. This ID, he paused. It's outdated, isn't it? The edges are worn, the laminate's peeling. Samuel shifted slightly. It's valid. Renewed last year. Anderson tilted the card, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny, as if expecting it to crumble in his hand. Then, in a single careless motion, he dropped. The plastic rectangle hit the marble floor with a sharp clack, sliding to rest near Samuel's worn shoes. The lobby seemed to freeze. Conversations from passing bankers hushed. Even the hum of the elevators felt muted. Daniel's chest tightened. "Excuse me?" Anderson raised his brows with mock innocence. "Oh, my apologies. Slipped right out of my hand." His tone betrayed the truth. There was no accident. Samuel bent slowly, knees aching, to retrieve his ID. His fingers brushed the cold marble as he picked it up, his face calm, but his dignity bruised. He stood again, shoulders stiff, and tucked the card back into his wallet. Daniel's blood boiled. "That was unnecessary," Anderson shrugged. "Banking requires certain standards. We expect documents to reflect professionalism. This card..." He smirked. "Well, it looks like it belongs to a janitor, not the father of a CEO handling a $5 billion deal." The words hung heavy, venom wrapped in civility. The breaking point for Daniel, the deal, the investors, the headlines, all of it blurred in that moment. All he could see was his father, a man who had given everything, standing humiliated in a bank lobby by a man who thought dignity came from a plastic card. He took a step forward, his voice low but sharp. That man worked 35 years in a steel mill. He put food on the table when nobody else would hire him. He carried me on his shoulders when I was too tired to walk. You may see an old card, but I see the backbone of my life." Anderson smirked, clearly unfazed. "That may be, but business doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on perception. And right now, perception isn't in your favor." Daniel inhaled, deeply. His mind raced. This was the deal of a lifetime. Years of work had built up to this. Billions were on the line. But then he looked at his father, at the quiet strength in Samuel's eyes, the pride that had dimmed just slightly under the insult. And he knew. No deal, no number, no empire was worth this. Daniel turned back to Anderson, his voice steady. "Then perception is wrong, and this deal..." He paused, his chest rising with resolve. "Is dead." Anderson blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daniel said, stepping closer. "If this institution cannot respect the man who raised me, then you do not deserve to touch a cent of what I've built. The deal ends here." Gasps echoed through the lobby. Employees turned their heads. A security guard shifted uneasily. Anderson's smirk faltered, his face paling. "Mr. Carter, this is a $5 billion contract. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, my father's dignity is worth more than $5 billion. He turned to Samuel. "Come on, Dad. We're leaving." And with that, the two Carters walked out of the bank, not with a signed contract, but with their heads held high. Silence in the car. The engine purred softly as Daniel guided the sleek black sedan through the city streets. Normally the car was filled with upbeat jazz, his father's favorite, or quiet conversation about business and family. But today, silence pressed against the windows like heavy fog. Samuel sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the skyline. His ID rested in his wallet, tucked safely away, yet the sting of what had happened at the bank lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Daniel gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles pale. Every fiber of him wanted to rage, to curse Anderson's name, to storm back into that bank and demand respect. But beside him sat the man who had taught him restraint, who had taught him that dignity wasn't in the shouting, but in the standing tall. Still, Daniel's chest ached. He had walked away from $5 billion. Not just money, but a deal that would have rewritten the future of his company, given him leverage in markets he had only dreamed of entering. And yet, his father's eyes mattered more. Finally, Samuel broke the silence. "Son, you didn't have to do that." Daniel glanced at him. "Yes, I did." "No," Samuel said softly. "Deals come and go. Pride can be swallowed. You worked for years for this." Daniel shook his head. "And you worked for decades for me. You carried the weight so I could even dream of sitting in that bank. I will not let anyone throw that." On the floor, Samuel's lips curved in the faintest smile, but his eyes were still troubled. "It's not about me, Daniel. It's about what you're building." "It is about you," Daniel said firmly, "because everything I build has your fingerprints on it. And if I have to choose between billions and your dignity, it's no choice at all." The silence returned, but this time it was different, not heavy, but alive, charged with something stronger than anger, something like resolve. Lessons in the rear view. As the car wound through the streets, Daniel's mind slipped back into memories. He was 8 years old again, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their small living room. His father was patching, his work boots with a needle and thread, humming quietly. "Dad," young Daniel had asked, "why don't we just buy new boots?" Samuel chuckled. "Because, son, sometimes the world won't give you new boots. Sometimes all you get are the old ones, and you have to make them last. What matters isn't what you're given, it's what you make of it." That lesson had stayed with him. Through college rejections, through investors who turned him down, through long nights in a cramped apartment when he coded software with one hand and ate instant noodles with the other. And now, after the bank humiliation, that lesson echoed louder than ever. What matters isn't what you're given, it's what you make of it. The bank had closed a door. Fine, he would build his own. The midnight decision. That night, long after his father had gone to bed, Daniel sat in his home office. The city skyline glittered outside his window, towers of steel and light rising into the darkness. On his desk lay the contract, unsigned, incomplete. He stared at it for a long time before pushing it aside. In its place, he opened a blank document. At the top, he typed in bold letters, "Independent. Capital Initiative." No more begging for approval from banks that saw only color and class. No more dependence on institutions that confused arrogance with authority. If they wouldn't finance him with dignity, he would finance himself. The idea was audacious, borderline, reckless. But so had been every breakthrough in his life. He would build a coalition of private investors, global partners, and even communities that believed in what Carter Global stood for. And it wouldn't just be about raising billions. It would be about proving a point. Respect is the foundation of real wealth. He leaned back in his chair, adrenaline coursing through him. The bank thought they had the power. They had no idea what they had awakened. Allies in unlikely places. The next weeks were a whirlwind. News of Daniel walking away from the deal spread quickly in corporate circles. At first, people whispered that he had gone mad. Who throws away $5 billion? But then others leaned in closer. Some admired his boldness. Others respected his refusal to be disrespected. Slowly, calls began to come in. One was from Aisha Rahman, a venture capitalist from Dubai, who had been skeptical of the bank-heavy deal in the first place. "I heard what happened," she said over the phone. "Most men in your position would have swallowed their pride and signed. You didn't. That tells me you're not just chasing money. You're chasing legacy. I want in." Another came from Luis Mendoza, a logistics magnate in South America. "Banks treat us like numbers, but family, that's something different. You walked away for your father. That means you'll walk through fire for your partners. I trust that." Day by day, the Independent Capital Initiative gained momentum. What had started as a midnight document became a movement. Instead of one bank deal, Daniel was building an entire network of respect-driven capital. A father's gaze one evening, Samuel sat in Daniel's office, watching him pace with excitement as he explained the new plan. Charts and projections covered the walls, sticky notes littered the desk. "So you see, Dad," Daniel said, "instead of depending on a single bank, we spread the risk. We bring in partners from multiple sectors, tech, logistics, even renewable energy. We create not just a deal, but an ecosystem." They thought they were punishing me by slamming that door, but they actually freed me to build something bigger. Samuel watched quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. After a long silence, he said, "Son, I'm proud. Not because of the money, not because of the scale. I'm proud because you didn't let anger make you small. You let it make you grow." Daniel's throat tightened. He had faced investors, journalists, competitors, but his father's approval was the one victory that felt like everything. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. Samuel nodded. "Just remember, when you stand tall, don't forget to reach down and lift others with you. That's the real measure of success." The turning of the tide 2 years later, the skyline of the city looked different. Tower cranes dotted the horizon, highways bustled with new cargo routes, and Carter Global Industries had become a household name on 3 continents, where once the company had been reliant on a single bank's approval. Now it stood at the center of a vast coalition of independent investors and partners. The Independent Capital Initiative had grown beyond Daniel's imagination, becoming a model for business leaders who wanted freedom from institutions that operated on arrogance instead of respect. The bold move that others had called reckless was now studied in business schools. Journalists who had doubted him now wrote profiles about his vision. And employees who once feared for their jobs found themselves part of a company that was growing faster than any of them had dreamed. But Daniel never forgot the moment it all began. The sound of his father's ID hitting the marble floor echoed still in the back of his mind, a constant reminder that dignity was priceless. And now he would carry that lesson to its ultimate conclusion. An invitation from the past one morning. As Daniel sat reviewing expansion plans for a new logistics hub in West Africa, his assistant entered with a letter. "Sir, this arrived by courier. No email. Hand-delivered." Daniel raised an eyebrow, breaking the wax seal. Inside was a crisp letter embossed with the emblem of Grayson National Bank. He read it slowly, lips curling in a mix of irony and satisfaction. "Mr. Carter, Grayson National Bank would like to formally invite you to be the keynote speaker at our annual Global Finance Summit. We believe your pioneering work in independent capital has reshaped modern finance, and we wish to honor your contributions." It was signed by none other than Philip Anderson. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the letter dangling between his fingers. The same man who had thrown his father's ID on the floor now sought to celebrate him. He almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of the sheer poetry of time. "Dad's going to want to see this," he murmured. The Summit, the Global Finance Summit was hosted in the same glittering tower where humiliation had once unfolded. The marble lobby was polished brighter than ever, banners proclaiming innovation and respect hanging from the walls. But Daniel walked in not as a man seeking approval. He walked in as the man everyone else sought approval from. Samuel accompanied him, cane in hand now, age having slowed his steps but not dimmed his eyes. He wore the same suit from years before, but Daniel noticed how differently people treated him this time. Where once they looked through him, now they looked at him, with deference, even awe. In the grand hall, rows of executives, investors, and journalists filled the seats. Cameras flashed as Daniel took the stage. Anderson sat in the front row, his smile tight, his hands clapping a little too quickly. The years had etched more lines into his face, but his arrogance had softened, replaced by something closer to regret. The speech Daniel stood at the podium, pausing for a moment as he looked out across the audience. Then his gaze drifted to his father, sitting proudly in the second row. 2 years ago, Daniel began, his voice steady but resonant. "I stood in this very building, on the verge of signing a deal worth $5 billion. To many, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. To me, it was supposed to be the culmination of decades of sacrifice, not mine, but my father's." He let the words sink in, the silence in the hall taut with anticipation. But then something happened, something small, something many would call insignificant. My father's ID was dropped on the floor, not by accident, but as a gesture of dismissal, a way of saying, "You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted toward Anderson, whose face had gone pale. In that moment, I had a choice. I could look away, sign the deal, and pretend dignity didn't matter. Or I could walk away, knowing I might lose everything. I chose the latter. Not because I didn't value the deal, but because I valued something more. Respect. A murmur of agreement spread across the room. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in. And in walking away, I learned a truth. Wealth built on disrespect will always be fragile. But wealth built on dignity becomes legacy. He turned his eyes back to Samuel. My father taught me that. With every sacrifice he made, every hour he worked, every moment he chose honor over ease. And today, if Carter Global stands tall, it is because he stood taller long before me. The audience erupted into applause, but Daniel wasn't finished. 2. Every leader in this room, the numbers on your balance sheet are not your true worth. The legacy you leave behind is measured in how you treat people, especially those who cannot give you anything in return. He stepped back, letting the applause wash over him. But his eyes never left his father's, a private reckoning after. The summit ended. Anderson approached, his hand extended. His voice was quieter, stripped of arrogance. "Mr. Carter." "Daniel, your speech was powerful. I owe you an apology. I was wrong that day. I let prejudice blind me, and I humiliated your father when I should have honored him. If there's anything I can do to make amends." Daniel studied him. The years had humbled Anderson, but some wounds couldn't be erased by words. "You can't take back what happened," Daniel said evenly. "But you can choose to never let it happen again, to anyone. That will mean more than any apology." Anderson nodded slowly, his gaze dropping. "You have my word." Daniel didn't shake his hand, not out of spite, but because he had already moved past the need for it. He turned to his father. "Ready to head home, Dad?" Samuel smiled. More than ready. A legacy secured. That evening, father and son sat on the porch of Samuel's modest home, sipping sweet tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You know, son," Samuel said quietly, "when that man dropped my ID, I felt smaller than I had in years. But tonight, listening to you, I felt taller than I ever have." Daniel's throat tightened. "Everything I've done, Dad, it's all because of you. Your name will outlive mine." Samuel shook his head gently. "No, Daniel. Our names will walk together. Mine carried. You here, yours will carry generations forward. That's legacy." The cicadas hummed in the distance. The night was warm, peaceful. For the first time in years, Daniel felt not just successful, but whole.